the job of the press to topple governments. It's the job of the press to report on the real existing conditions of a culture, a society, a government, a sports event, not to bring about the desired result of the reporter or newspaper editor or owner. It's the job of the people, the job of the legislature that they elect to topple any government or individual office holder if that's what's to happen. The job of the larger system, its institutions, and the people of the country. Well, the system worked in Watergate. And maybe we haven't seen the system work as well since. Because in Watergate, we saw democratic principles succeed in a way that reaffirmed our common belief in the ideas of a government that serves its citizens, in the rule of law. But in Watergate, it's particularly important for those of you students who weren't there for it, weren't born, to understand why the system worked in Watergate. Yeah, we at the Washington Post, Woodward, myself, played a role. The press had a role, including the New York Times, Time Magazine. The press did its job. Nothing more, nothing less. But it was only part of why the system worked, because those stories that we were writing got the attention of a courageous federal judge in Washington, a Republican, John Sirica. And it was the judiciary, through that judge, who initially put pressure on those in his courtroom, which is to say the Watergate burglars, to tell the truth and to begin the unraveling of this conspiracy that we were writing about. Compelled them in his courtroom through his judicial actions to acknowledge they were being paid for their silence as part of a massive cover-up of what had happened at Watergate and who was responsible. And then, having read the press, having seen what Judge Sirica did in his courtroom, a great senator, a Democrat, Senator Sam Ervin of North Carolina, a great constitutionalist, convened a hearing at which his vice chairman, a Republican, Senator Howard Baker, asked, what did the president know and when did he know it? And that committee of Congress used its power of subpoena and compelled testimony that the press could never uncover. And slowly the whole story became known of perhaps the most injurious and unconstitutional abuse of power by a president in the history of the United States. A criminal president, a criminal presidency. And more of the best obtainable version of the truth became known. And yet, that president, Richard Nixon, resisted, and he wouldn't give up the tapes of his conversations that the courts had ordered him to give up. And no wonder, now that we've heard them, Woodward calls them the gift that keeps on giving. To listen to the President of the United States 1 year before the break-in at Watergate, with Henry Kissinger, his national security advisor, at his side, and his chief of staff, Bob Haldeman. They're talking about some documents that are in a safe in the Brookings Institution, a Washington think tank. Papers about Lyndon Johnson's conduct of the war in Vietnam. Conduct that Nixon and Kissinger believe will make Nixon look better for his conduct if they can get hold of the papers. We could blackmail Johnson if we got them, says the chief of staff to the President of the United States. He means smear. And Kissinger says, but we've known about these papers, we've never been able to get them. And the President of the United States says, firebomb the goddamn place. I don't care what you have to do, blow the safe. The President of the United States. those papers. Let's think about this. Say it was John Adams talking about his predecessor, George Washington. Blow the goddamn safe so we can smear George Washington. That's how extraordinary this presidency was. And for 13 days, Nixon kept coming back to that subject saying, did you break in? Did you blow the safe? Did you get those papers? And it was not called off until one of the president's aides, the president by then had come out here to San Clemente, flew out to San Clemente and said, we cannot do this, and turned it off. So Nixon resisted giving up his tapes. Makes sense. The courts ordered him to give it up. He refused. He fired the special prosecutor in the so-called Saturday Night Massacre. And then the Supreme Court of the United States, with a Chief Justice whom Richard Nixon had appointed and expected to go to bat for him, that Chief Justice convened his fellow justices and said, no, we have to have a unanimous decision by this court in the case of whether the president gives up his tapes, a unanimous decision that says that no one in this country, including the President of the United States, is above the law. And he marshaled that court to produce that unanimous decision that resulted in Richard Nixon being forced to give up those tapes. Today we have a Supreme Court that is politicized to the point where it decided a presidential election during our lifetime on a non-judicial basis. Let me tell you, one of the people who was at this event in Scottsdale, Arizona the other day was Sandra Day O'Connor, one of the justices on that court, who has courageously said, we should not have reached that decision. We should not have taken that case. So today we have a Supreme Court that is politicized to the point that we listen to long ideological diatribes from members of the court itself. But what happened in Watergate after the Supreme Court ordered the president to give up his tapes? And Richard Nixon said, after producing some of the tapes, it made it clear that he had been a criminal president of the United States, but he would not resign. Meanwhile, the judicial branch, the legislative branch, the Congress of the United States, which incidentally, that investigation by Sam Ervin's Watergate Committee was authorized by a 77-0 vote of the U.S. Senate. Can you imagine a 77-0 vote by the U.S. Senate on anything today? And so the House of Representatives passed articles of impeachment through its Judiciary Committee did. It was certain, and again, Republicans cast the crucial votes on that committee, so it was a nonpartisan, non-ideological decision of that committee. Nixon's impeachment was certain, and the question was whether or not he could survive in office during a trial in the Senate of the United States, which requires a 2/3 vote for conviction. And so, Republicans, led by the great conservative Senator Barry Goldwater of Arizona, marched to the White House and told the president, you must resign or we will convict you of high crimes and misdemeanors. Imagine the difference in a functional political system in which our legislators are committed to the common good, and the citizens of our country by then had made clear they understood what the national interest in the common good was with their representatives. So, what can a dropout, actually, of the class of 1965, tell those students that I met today about what's going on in their country today. Not just why our government isn't working, but can it work? With the people we have in it now, I don't think so. There, I'm not optimistic. But I'm cautiously optimistic, and I think it can work because of those young people. Because I met young people like them all over the country. And they understand and exhibit a justified disgust at our political system in its present incarnation, and a great desire to move beyond this cultural and ideological warfare which my generation, your generation, has put on theirs as a yoke. My generation and the succeeding ones in the second half of the 20th century accomplished remarkable things, created the greatest meritocracy in the history of the world, opportunity, economic and social, for all our people to an extent never imagined, civil rights, the undoing of so much of our history of slavery and oppression of African Americans, women's rights, gay rights, the post-World War II economic miracle, creating an economic engine such as mankind had never known, great cities and gentrification, and an entertainment nation and technology that we all take for granted. Rock and roll, a great political force, if you think about it. Look at the role of rock and roll in the fall of the Communist Empire. But we of our generation, most of us here, have failed those students. We have taken more than our share out of the system, plenty of it for ourselves. And we have left them, unless they're rich, those students who sat with me on some steps outside here today, left them much less in the way of opportunity than we had. People who really heeded JFK's call were more often than not young people. They led the civil rights revolution. They went to Mississippi, white and black, in the summer of 1964, 50 years ago today. Young people, their accomplishments, those of their children of that era, and the modern nation created on their watch are not to be underestimated. But if we are going to be liberated from what our generation has done to our politics, our political culture, over the last 20, 25 years, these students have to do it. And so I salute them and thank you for being here.